Welcome to this panel, My Canon Now, Making My Own Continuity. I'm MoonTruffles, or Moon for short. I'm a fan artist and graphic designer, and today I'm going to talk about making original continuities, or original AUs. Now, for those of you who might not know, AU stands for Alternate Universe. Basically, AUs are stories that deviate from established canon as much or as little as the creator wants. When I first joined the fandom, I learned about AUs in the context of being attached to official shows and movies. Like, here are the TFA guys, but they're all humans, or here are the G1 guys in a fantasy setting. My first experience with original AUs was back in 2014, when I was cast as Moonracer in an audio drama called Transformers Elite. Although the premise was heavily inspired by G1, it brought in a handful of characters from other shows and put a new spin on the characters who came from the G1 cartoon. Basically, it was a continuity all its own. That was when it really occurred to me that you could just do that. I mean, the whole franchise is known for constantly reinventing itself, so, if anything, this is the perfect fandom for this sort of thing. I started trying to come up with my own AUs not long after that, but none of them really stuck until 2018, when I came up with the first ideas for what I eventually named Transformers Reversal. This is the AU I'll be using today to walk you through my process. So before we get started, it does need to be said, this is not meant to be a definitive how-to guide. There are so many different ways to come up with an AU, and obviously there are no strict rules that you absolutely must follow and no strict order you absolutely have to do them in. I'm simply sharing my process in hopes that I inspire someone else to start their own. If you're unsure, or stuck, or even just nervous about putting your ideas out there, I hope this will be helpful and encouraging. Alright, so once you decide to create your own AU, you can start by considering your topics. It might be kind of a no-brainer, but you're gonna make your best work if it's about what you like, instead of what you think you should make so other people like it. Be as self-indulgent as you want. You can hone in on stuff like your favorite genres, themes, or character tropes. So, in general, I love coming-of-age stories with young protagonists, and I like a decent balance of action and slice-of-life stuff. And of course, you can also consider what you already enjoy from canon universes. I'd say anything's fair game there. If you're mixing and matching stuff from the live-action movies, animated, and IDW, it's gonna wind up being pretty distinct from all those things in the end. I really love using more obscure and underused characters, and if I do decide to use a more mainstream one for my main cast, I try to change them up significantly. So, with all that in mind, you'll be able to flesh out a basic premise for your AU. We're still pretty early on in the process though, so don't worry if you're still shaky on the finer points. The nice thing about making AUs for an existing franchise is that other fans don't need you to go into excessive detail to get the gist. I mean, we all know Transformers are alien robots who turn into things, so if you need help, you can identify what sets your AU apart by finishing a short phrase. Alien robots, but also. And figuring out how to finish the sentence is a quick way to nail down what makes your continuity unique and what others can expect when they first dive in. You can even apply it to canon. Alien robots, but also they turn into animals and don't have human allies. But also there are smaller alien robots to collect for power-ups. But also they're hot? Well, anyway, if I applied this phrase to Reversal, it would be alien robots, but also they're the kids who are getting dragged into a human war. Now, the next few sections have to do with building a cast, a storyline, and a world. Honestly, they can be done in any order. In fact, plenty of stuff will naturally overlap as you go along. The world can influence the plot can influence how you build your cast, etc. I went cast first personally because I like to focus on the characters and let everything else develop out from there. So, when you consider your cast, you can start by asking yourself, who do you think could best move your concepts along? Sure, your favorites and even your OCs can be the obvious picks, it's your AU after all, but sometimes you'll be digging through that toy box and find someone else who fits the bill surprisingly well. I wouldn't say any canon version of my main cast is a favorite of mine, I just tailored certain aspects of them to suit my interests and premise. And, again, you don't need anyone's permission to use weird characters or do something weird to standard ones. I mean, come on. Animated turned Alita 1 into a spider, Cyberverse included Rack and Ruin, and the Michael Bay movies, well, they sure exist, don't they? So, since my specific setting is post-war Cybertron, I ended up gravitating more towards characters who have either been portrayed as neutral or have ties to more neutral parties. The one exception was Whirl, but in that case, I was set more on the attitude than anything. And speaking of Whirl, she was actually the first character I had ideas for. When I was first brainstorming Reversal, they just revealed the characters for the upcoming Rescue Bots Academy. I thought their little kid Whirl was the cutest thing ever. But I also really like the snarkiness of IDW Whirls, so my brain jumped to somehow combining these traits into this sort of comedic, chaotic middle school kid. So that's where my Whirl ended up. And even though she was the first character I came up with, she's also the youngest. I wanted to give her a sibling to banter with, and I also still needed a group leader. Early on, I decided against using Optimus or Orion, but I did want someone who could give off a similar big bro vibe. Coincidentally, my partner was, and still is, a one-man hype train for Giltor, who is this super obscure manga character who didn't even have an official romanization for his name until 2019. He had me fully on board for using him in some capacity. I mean, Gil's similar to Optimus on a surface level, but beyond that, he's a drastically different character, and best of all, he's also enough of a blank canvas that I was free to do whatever I wanted with him. Also, fun fact that played into his characterization. Before the official spelling was confirmed, a lot of people spelled it Gultaur. Now, since I couldn't unsee the word guitar whenever I read it, I turned my version of Gil into a musician, and that led to the whole group forming a rock band. So, something as random as that laid the foundation of the whole group's character dynamics. Now, Windblade was the next one I settled on for the lineup. I love her. I think she's really cool, but all her portrayals in canon thus far have been fairly consistent, so I wanted to give her a new look and personality. Something that stuck with me from what I've seen of her RID and Cyberverse versions is how she's so responsible, dependable, and self-assured. I wanted to carry those traits over, but also subvert them a bit, since she's just a teenager and likely wouldn't be as confident. So, she ended up being this outgoing overachiever with great grades, but that also means she has almost no free time because she's always taking on way too many projects for stuff like student council, AP classes, extracurriculars, that sort of thing. I also gave her a different alt mode and made her a car instead of a plane. This worked out great for balancing the group's vehicle modes, cause now we have our two grounders, Gil, who's a truck, and Windblade, who's a car, and our two flyers, Whirl, who's a helicopter, and our jet, Cyclonus. So, my reasoning for including him was pretty basic. I really wanted a grumpy emo character, and he checks those boxes right off the bat. And like I said before, these kids formed a band. Someone's gotta be the vocalist. Not only has Psyche been shown singing in the comics, I felt like he just translated very well into this broody, artsy personality. And somewhere down the line, he also turned into an anime fan? Not exactly sure where or why anime is a thing on Cybertron, but I ran with it. Alright, so we've got these rough ideas for the kids down. But I mentioned a human war, so of course I made some humans too. The Nest crew was almost all human companions that I found really interesting but weren't really focused on in canon. I slotted them into roles I typically see in a core 5-bot Transformer team, so I ended up with Michaela, the leader, Danny, the heavy hitter, Tessa, the scout, June, the medic/voice of reason, and Simmons as the, team contrarian? I feel like every team member has their moment to be that, but a lot of times there's that one guy who's constantly ragging on the leader for some reason or another, so he's that guy. Once I finalized my cast, I started redesigning them to better fit what I envisioned for the AU. I'm not the kind of fancy artist who does time-lapse videos mainly because I just straight up forget I can do that, but luckily I did keep track of my sketching process for the kids. So instead of having one sketch I continuously chipped away at, I did 3 or 4 refining sketches, each on a new layer, before I ever began inking. This meant redrawing everyone over and over and over again until I was satisfied with how they looked. And I can already hear you guys yelling at me, "Oh, but Moon, that sounds like way too much work!" And it is. It is so much work. But I do recommend you try it at least once, especially for group shots like this. It really helped me refine the shapes and silhouettes of each character when I was forced to draw them repeatedly, and doing so streamlined my process and made it easier for me to keep them on model whenever I had to draw them afterward. It took a while because I'm also a notorious procrastinator, but I completed the full group lineups for both the robot and human protagonists. So what started out here conceptually turned into this, and what started out here turned into this. Now, not long after that was done, I ran out of art-making juice for the next several months. So once my energy for drawing tanked, I switched gears to focus on plot. Okay, so when it comes to structuring and outlining a whole story from start to finish, there are already a ton of great writing resources out there that are able to go more in depth about the subject than I can in a 20-minute panel. I recommend looking over a few of those later and learning what works for you. As for the way I plot out Reversal, I just made a Google Doc and started filling it with any major story beats I could think of. It's not the most well-organized thing ever, unless you think several pages of rambling bullet points counts as organized. But as I continue to come up with plans for story and character arcs, I fill in the blanks between the points I've already written. Sometimes I'll even rearrange parts if I figure out a better way to make the story flow. Like I said, lots of this will overlap with other steps. I started writing my outline after I decided on my main characters, but before I ever started drawing them. And working through the plot is how I was able to figure out who I wanted the antagonists to be and how they'd affect the heroes. Way early on, I knew Nest would be fighting Mech, but at the start, I didn't know who would actually be in Mech's roster aside from Silas. As I went along, I'd think of characters, and if I figured they would give the heroes enough of a challenge, I threw them in. So, since I plan Reversal as if it were a show, I split my plot up by seasons and made sure the stakes ramped up accordingly with each progressing one. Now, I don't want to drop my entire plotting doc on you guys, so let me just sum up the gist of what I've got so far. Now, Season 1, of course, introduces us to our main characters and the world they're familiar with. It establishes modern Cybertronian society and gives us very brief glimpses into the history that led to things being how they are now. The action the kids face is more lighthearted. Most of the enemies they help Nest take down are just remotely operated mech drones, though they do have occasional confrontations with the Saboteur Circuit Breaker and the mysterious spy, Nightbird. Season 2 picks back up on normal life, but with the sense that things will soon change drastically. A new threat from Mech is introduced, and the kids find themselves in more serious danger whenever they help the Nest crew. Nightbird's background gets gradually revealed, as do Gil's origins. Finding out about them actually becomes a driving point for his character development. And finally, there's a major event. Thanks to the largest scale mech attack so far, the presence of the humans is revealed to the other Cybertronians. So, the secret is out for Season 3. And Season 3 is the one I've got the least mapped out, but I know for sure that this is where the action ramps up significantly. With Mech now threatening Cybertron as a whole, a bunch of wartime characters, many of whom are now mentors and guardians to our younger cast, spring back into action. Last of all, I plan for it to be the conclusion, so obviously there's gonna be a bunch of resolutions and tying up loose ends from the previous seasons. So, ta-da! That's my very slapdash story outline. Not the most eloquent thing ever, but it gets the point across, so hey, if I can do it, you can too! Last but not least, we have world building. I will admit I do this step a little weird. It's probably one of the least detailed parts about my AU, primarily because I don't delve deep into it until after I work out the cast and story. I also don't have any of my own visuals for this, so like the plot, it's mainly a lot of notes and questions that I don't have fully formed answers to yet, but I'll try to keep my thoughts as coherent as possible. So just for a quick rundown of some Transformer-specific things you can consider, you can think about the cultures of Cybertronian cities, or even the colony worlds if you plan on planet hopping. Are the traditional factions a thing in your AU? Why or why not? Sparks, T-Cogs, all the fun robot bits, how do they work? What's the history of your AU? Were there major wars in the past, or are your characters fighting one on a scale nobody has seen before? So let's use a pretty general example. The kids in Reversal go to school, right? So sure, I started out with the basic outline of a standard American public school since that's what I'm most familiar with. It injects the sense of normalcy I was going for. But why stop there? As I mentioned before, the main group alone has a truck, a car, a helicopter, and a jet. And those aren't the only alts available. How is the layout of a school building altered when it needs to accommodate for several types of vehicles and multiple size classes? How are certain subjects taught in Cybertronian classes versus human ones? I'm pretty sure their biology classes would follow a wildly different curriculum from ours, and I'd certainly hope PE does too. Oh, but if you guys want better examples of how in-depth you can get with world building in AU, look no further than Transformers Snap, made by my friend Blurrito. No joke, guys, Snap has super detailed rundowns on anything you can think of. Biology, mythology, architecture, food, and my personal favorite, food. Now, at some point, I'm sure you're going to want to share this cool new AU you're making with your friends, which means it's time to consider the format you'll be presenting all this content in. A lot of folks will immediately jump to wanting to make a webcomic, but don't feel like you have to if it's too time-consuming or energy draining. There's more than one way to convey a story, and you can use as many as you like. Along with making comics, there is the tried and true method of writing fanfiction, cause hey, that works out for just about everyone, you know? You can do one-off illustrations with descriptions. Even simple edits like character mood boards or character memes can be enough to help get your ideas across. And something I kinda wanna make is another audio drama, because even after all these years, I do still miss working on Elite. And if you wanna be super extra like me, you can even consider stuff like branding and marketing. I mean, look at this. What does any of this have to do with fleshing out the AU itself? Nothing. It's just something I thought was fun, because graphic design is my passion until the point where it's not. So, that just about covers my process and current progress. But before we wrap up, I do want to give one last easy piece of advice. Be open to collaborate. A great part about fan projects is that you don't need to keep it under wraps from everyone until you have a fully realized product. Let your friends know what you're working on as you work on it. If anything, having other people to bounce ideas off of can benefit you when you've hit a stumbling block. I know I wouldn't have gotten as far as I have with Reversal without my friends encouraging my weird ideas and offering up theirs. And since their feedback was so integral to making my AU, I want to take the time to shout out a few of theirs. If you guys were interested in checking out other fan-made continuities, I highly recommend these guys and their projects. I'll have URLs on each of the slides. First off is, again, Blurrito with Snap. It also features a young cast attending school together, but adds an awesome fantasy element to it. It draws heavily from the magical girl genre, and along with the mind-boggling amount of world building they've got, they also have a mind-boggling amount of character bios and lineups. There's a non-zero chance that your favorite not only exists in this AU, they might even have nifty relic-granted superpowers. Next up is Agatha, who has not one, but 4 distinct AUs. I don't know how she does it, but she's basically a random generator of cool ideas, and churns out so much fantastic art to boot. Paradise and Rangers are 2 distinct Beastformer AUs. Wreck and Rule, as you can probably guess, is focused on the Wreckers and the wild missions they're sent on. Toku is based off of tokusatsu media like Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. It was actually a collaboration. She co-created this AU and its spin-off with the next artist, Drama King. In addition to making Toku with Agatha, he also created Transformers Isolation. Look, I know after the first IDW run, a lot of you are still hungry and thirsty for some good, or at least good adjacent Megatrons. Drama said, I'm gonna do you one better, and gave you a heroic, knightly Megatron who turns into a wolf and wears a dope as hell cape. Seriously guys, you want in on this. Now last, but certainly not least, is my buddy Necro and his Beast Wars-inspired comic, Brave New World. Okay, you know how I said making an ongoing comic is very time-consuming and not always feasible for everyone? This dude's been churning out pages since 2016, and last I checked, his page count was already over 1,000. I don't know what else to say aside from he's extremely powerful, and you should all read his comic. So, with that, this panel is just about done. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope I've been able to inspire some of you guys to try making your own AUs. I definitely love to see what you guys come up with. If you'd like to see more updates on Reversal as I continue to flesh out the details, you can follow the Tumblr blog transformersreversal.tumblr.com. And if you want to check out more of my art in general, you can find me at moontruffles.tumblr.com and at MoonTrufflesArt on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Hope you had a great time, and I'll see you around.